Thank you.
All right, everyone in. All right, I want everybody up in the first 3 rows. First 3 rows. Over here, there's room.
Hey guys, we said 3 rows. Let's do it. Come here.
Lots of room here, lots of room there.
You guys are eating into your free time later on. Because if we run over late, it's going into your free time. There's some right here too, right?
Guys, that's the 4th row. Who's the 4th row?
Go back to grade school. You're in the 4th row, not the 3rd row.
Tick tock, tick tock.
Got some chairs over there, we got some chairs over here.
We can count.
You guys, who here went to public school? You all go to public school? How many of you are in public school now? Okay, and guess what? They figured out what 3 rows look like. What is going on here, you guys? 3 rows. 1, 2, 3. Count them. Thank you. All right, guys, I've gotta get serious for a minute. We've had a great time. It's been good, but I'm pretty embarrassed by the way that the lunchroom has been left. One of the things that we teach, that we believe very strongly in, is respect. The lunch people work hard. They provide us with good meals. They serve us well. They're always with a smile. They take care of anybody with special needs, with special diets. And you guys just left it in a disaster, and guess what? Some of the moms had to clean it up. And some of your mates had to clean it up. There's no excuse for that, I'm sorry. Absolutely no excuse. No excuse for ever disrespecting another person or their work. So I don't want to see that in the morning. I'll be really disappointed if I do. Tonight we're going to have a couple of speakers. We're going to have an ice cream social. Tomorrow we are going to be announcing the essay winners. And I think that's it, isn't it, Ellen? Yes.
Not only was the lunchroom a mess, but we're wasting food. I'm not sure if you guys put value on this or not, but there's food taken, just sitting there left.
We pay for it too.
We pay for it. Not only that, but before the Lord, we should be good stewards with whatever we have. And on top of that, there was trash on the ground from here all the way to the cafeteria. I'm seeing trash here, there, and I'm thinking, how many people have walked back and forth all day long? You can't see something? Pick it up. Be respectful. This group will be judged as a whole by the people that work here. They're going to say, those kids were slobs. They were disrespectful. They wasted food. Whatever. You are not setting a good name for yourselves. As a whole, nobody's going to be judged individually in this group. You
That's
will be
right.
judged as a whole.
Well, we've never had this ever at Liberty Academy. Never. We've never had it where people take off where they shouldn't be. We've never had some of the antics that have been here. And it's disappointing. I told you at the very beginning, and I told you I was serious about the fact that we think of each of you as a gift from God. We know that. You're here. God chose for you to be born. You are a blessing to us. We can only give you our best. But we expect you to give your best back to the people who are working to give their time. The speakers that have come. Some of the speakers you've had are amazing speakers. We've had someone from England to come and speak to you about Brexit, where there's nobody else doing that. We've had a tremendous economist and author who wrote those books that, I mean, I saw you paying really good attention then. I was pleased. But you need to think about your actions, and you need to think about the fact that not only do they see you and judge the academy, your last name is an advertisement of your family. You don't want people seeing that last name and thinking badly of the family. Your parents, your families don't deserve that. You need to treat yourself and others with more respect. If you're in agreement that from here forward, that's how it's going to be, I want to see your hands. Thank you. Loren, are you up next?
I think I am.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to have some fun. Okay, you heard Loren Spivack speak earlier. You pay attention because some of the things, the concepts that he says, he tells stories, and if you're paying attention, you really will learn something. And even if you don't quite catch it, don't be afraid to ask questions. That's how you learn. So will you help me in welcoming Mr. Loren Spivack?
Well, we were talking about, last time we started off with the insanity that is in every generation. I was trying to share that the challenge we all face is rooting out the craziness in our generation. It's very easy to find the craziness in previous generations. You see stuff they did, you're like, oh my gosh, you know, how could people think that slavery was a good idea? How did people think that Jim Crow was a good idea? You know, how did doctors used to bleed people, you know, thinking that was going to cure them? And there's a kind of a leftist interpretation of this that, well, they were all evil people. No, they weren't. They were regular people just like us. They were just wrong. And the challenge is to find what we're wrong about and what's going wrong in our time. And I want to talk about this a little bit in terms of the conflict that's brewing in our country today, and indeed the entire Western world, and what it's actually about. You and I have been learning this weekend about freedom and free markets and faith and history and what our country is about. There is another side to this. And I will tell you, you and everyone has been hearing things in the last few years that I never heard before. We've been hearing about transgendered bathrooms and democratic socialism and white privilege and microaggressions. And what is this all about? There is another side. And I want to talk about the left and what's happening on the left today. It's very different than it was when I was a kid. I want to do my best to explain what the challenge is, because I think it's very real, and what the left is about. I was talking with a couple of my sons a while back, and I found myself almost apologizing because I was born into an America that was not perfect. We're never perfect, but we were very secure in what our country was about and who we were and where we were going. And I always assumed that I would bequeath the same kind of America to my children. And it's very clear to me that that's not what's happening. What unfortunately we are bequeathing to this next generation is a big challenge and a big conflict. You read about the conflicts of the past and the things that Abraham Lincoln had to deal with, and the things that George Washington had to deal with, and you think of that as something that happens in another time. But I think it's happening in our time, and I'd like to talk about it. And the first question I'd like to answer about the left Yeah, and I don't use the term liberal anymore because I don't think they are liberal. I think I'm more liberal than they are. The left in the United States and the Western Europe is, what are the fundamental principles? We hear all these ideas, guaranteed, income, everybody gets free money, before they do anything. There's socialism and all of this stuff. What are their fundamental principles of the left today? And that's the first question. In a way, it's the easiest because they don't have any. Okay? To understand the left today, you have to understand that there are no principles whatsoever. And I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that they have different principles from our principles. I'm saying they don't have principles at all. And I should perhaps take a moment and define what the word principle means. What is a principle? Well, a principle is something that applies all the time to everybody. That's it. That's what makes it a principle. Would you like an example? The 10 Commandments are principles. Why are they principles? Because they apply all the time to everybody. You know anybody who's exempt? I don't know anyone who's exempt from the 10 Commandments. They're thousands of years old, and yet they're as relevant today as they ever were. That's the very definition of what a principle is. When we look at the American and the Western world, the political left today, what we find is a complete absence of principles. They believe stuff, but not in a principled way. Okay? So, for example, a lot of people are surprised to learn that the modern American left got its start as a free speech movement on the college campuses in the 1960s. That was really the beginning. It was free speech on the college campuses. And it's fascinating because those very same people grew up, and now they run the college campuses, and now they're doing everything they can to stop free speech. American college campuses are the least free speech place you're ever likely to find yourself. Well, what happened? Are they for free speech? Or are they against free speech? And the answer to ask the question is to betray your ignorance of the left. Okay? The answer is that they're for free speech when it's their free speech, and they're against free speech when it's anybody else's speech. Because speech is not a principle to the left, it's a tactic. Okay, a tactic is something you use when it helps you, and you throw it away when it doesn't help you. To me, free speech is a principle, and I hope to you. Okay, everybody should be allowed to express whatever opinion they have, no matter how wrong they are, no matter how horrible their opinion is. That doesn't matter. We defeat horrible ideas with better ideas. We don't shut them up. Okay, but the left doesn't think that. There's more examples than that. The latest trend on American university campuses is segregated dormitories for black students. Did you know that? Okay, I saw a recent survey where something like 45% of the universities surveyed had some kind of racially segregated dormitory facilities, because apparently the idea is that what prevents some black students from succeeding at the university is having pesky white students around. And this is really interesting because it seems like our country went through this before. This is like not a new thing. I thought the left was against segregation. But it turns out that they're not against segregation. They're against segregation when it's somebody else's segregation. They're for segregation when it's their segregation because it's not a principle. And 22% of the campuses have segregated graduation ceremonies. Okay? I'll give you, well, all right, let me take this to the next point. One of the consequences of not having principles, and that's what I'm telling you, is they don't believe in anything. One of the consequences of this is you tend to throw your own allies under the bus a lot. Because if you don't believe in anything, you tend not to stick with your own friends. So I want to give you a couple examples of that. The country of Sweden has a long and well-earned reputation for being the feminist capital of the world. The Swedes are so feminist. They pride themselves so much on it. In Sweden today, if you want to open a business, half your employees better be female, and half the board better be female. If you want to form a government in Sweden, half the government needs to be female. It doesn't matter who the people voted for. What matters is that everything has to be exactly split along gender lines, because Sweden is the feminist capital of the world. And then a couple years ago, a funny thing happened. Sweden has become one of the rape capitals of the world. The rates of the crime of rape in Sweden have been absolutely going through the roof. How does that happen? How do you go from being the most feminist country in the world to having the highest rate of rape in Europe? And the answer is that they brought in thousands and tens of thousands of migrants from the Middle East and North Africa who have been committing virtually all the rapes. And the Swedish government issued a report a couple years ago in which they broke down who was committing the rapes, and it was just ridiculous. It was like 95% immigrants and maybe 5% native Swedes. And I got to give credit where due. The Swedish government took immediate action when that report came out. They immediately passed a law against such reports. Okay, it's now illegal in Sweden to make a report about who's committing the rapes. Okay, you can't, so we won't see any more of that. Okay, well, what happened? What happened is that the left used to care about the women, but now they like the migrants more than they like the women. You know, too bad. We've moved on. Okay, I'll give you an analogous situation that's happening in the United States right now today. Until just a couple generations ago, there was essentially no such thing in the world as women's sports. Nobody had women's sports till like 2 generations ago. It's a whole new concept. But it's been thriving. It's a good concept. I'm in favor of women's sports. I think it's healthy, it's competitive, it's a great thing that women participate in a huge variety of sports. But that's all about to come to an end, because all over the United States, and indeed the Western world, men who claim to be women are being allowed to participate in the women's sports. And the fact is, men and women are different. Okay? You know, nothing bad about that. We're just different. We are. And there was some competitive races in Connecticut a month or two ago where the men who claimed to be women won all the medals, all of them. Okay? Because men, on average, run faster than women. It's just the way it is. Okay? Women's hips are designed to give birth to babies. Men's hips run faster. On average, that's just the way it is. And it's not a bad thing. You know, if my wife could run faster than I could, you know, I probably never would have gotten married. So, you know, there's a positive side to it also. But that's, you know, that's just the way that it is. But they're winning all the medals. And you understand, there won't be women's sports if you continue down this road. And they had a bill in the United States House of Representatives to codify into law that anyone has to be whatever gender they say they are, okay, even though they're not. And every single Democrat except one in the United States House of Representatives voted for it, okay? This is not a fringe idea. This is a mainstream idea, at least in one of our political parties. There was a powerlifting competition where this man who claimed to be a woman broke, like, you know, 3 world records for women's powerlifting in one day, because he's a guy. Okay, you guys ever see like the women's NBA? Okay, there won't be a women's NBA. You understand? If I own a team in the women's NBA and I can put 5 guys out there who are each a foot taller than the women on the other team, you know, who's going to put a woman in the women's NBA? Okay, and what's fascinating is that the left doesn't care. They're not bothered by this, because in the United States, they prefer the transsexuals to the women, just like in Europe, they prefer the immigrants to the women. The left is like the worst spouse ever, The minute somebody else comes along, they're like, bye-bye, we've moved on. So don't get me wrong, they're going to dump the transsexuals and the immigrants in time also. They'll move on when somebody new comes along because they don't have principles. It is an unprincipled movement. So I want to talk about some of the principles that are at stake today, because I think I'm sad about it, but I guess in every tragedy there's an opportunity. I think you guys are going to grow up into a world where these principles have to be fought for in a way that they've not had to be fought for in a long time. And I'd like to point out a few of them, and one of them I already mentioned, and that is free speech. Free speech has never been so endangered in the United States as it is today. I am terrified for the future of free speech, and I want to tell you why. When I was a kid, there were lots of countries that had free speech. Countries like us, you know, Western, European, you know, Christian countries, Canada, you know, Britain, Germany, France, or at least West Germany, France, Australia, they all had free speech when I was a kid. Today, none of them do. None of them. Free speech is dead in practically every Western country in the world. The only major country in the entire world anymore that has free speech is the United States. Did you know that? What's killed free speech in these other countries has been the concept of hate speech. And what the left said when they came to end free speech was they said, we're not going to get rid of the nice, you know, happy speech. We're not going to stop you from talking about nice things like, you know, what a lovely day it is, and you can talk about the weather and, you know, what you did over the weekend. That's fine. We just want to get rid of the hate. You don't look like a hateful person to me. We're going to get rid of the hate and everything will be fine. Okay? How long before that becomes political? Well, let me tell you, the biggest political issue in Europe today is the migration of millions and millions of people from outside Europe into Europe. That's the issue. And you know, we were talking before about Brexit. Brexit is about the migration. You know, I don't know if you caught the yellow vest protests in France. It's about the migration. Everything in Europe today is about the migration of these immigrants. And if you're in favor of all these people coming into Europe, well, that's fine. You can talk about that all day long. If you're against it, that's hate speech, and it's illegal in every country in Europe. Practically every country in Europe. It is illegal, and they'll send you to prison. You can get a prison sentence for up to 2 years for the crime of hate speech. That is, saying an opinion that offends somebody. Okay? And the cases are happening all over the place. The British police are arresting, on average, 12 people a day for what they write on Facebook, for expressing the wrong opinion on Twitter or Facebook or other social media. The London police, there's a huge crime wave in London, but they've managed to divert 900 police officers in London full-time to monitoring what people put on the internet and then going out and arresting them if they write the wrong thing. This is Britain. They invented free speech. Yeah, this is, you know, I'm so cognizant of the British origins. You know, you know, we were talking also in this earlier in this seminar about you know, John Locke and the people who gave us these ideas. These political philosophers were all British. And it's dead in Britain. The cases are all over the place. There was the case of the guy in Scotland who taught his girlfriend's dog to do a Hitler salute. Did you hear this one? He taught the dog to go like that, you know, like a Nazi. And he was arrested and prosecuted and convicted for the crime of teaching the, I'm surprised they didn't arrest the dog, you know, doing this. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There was a case I was reading about, the 68-year-old widow retiree, And she wrote on Facebook, she said, you know, all this immigration is going to lower the average IQ in Britain. So she's heading off to spend the next 2 years in Her Majesty's prison for the crime of writing that opinion on Facebook. And you could say, well, you know, could it be true? It doesn't matter. The courts in Britain, in Scandinavia, in Canada, in Australia have all ruled that truth is not a defense. Okay? If you can prove that what you said was 100% true and accurate, doesn't matter. It's illegal. That's a truth crime. You have spoken an illegal truth, and you're going to prison for it. Okay? These are our allies. I'm not talking about some distant, you know, country that, you know, has some crazy government that, you know, that we can't relate to. These are the countries that are just like us. You may recall it was a horrible crime where this crazy guy in New Zealand shot up a mosque and killed a whole bunch of people, and it was a terrible thing. But the point I want to make is that the New Zealand government announced, the guy who did this was on Facebook, and he had this crazy manifesto about what he believed in that led him to do this, and he put the manifesto on Facebook. So at one point, practically the entire world had access to his manifesto, and the New Zealand government announced that if you possess a copy of his manifesto, you'll get 14 years in prison in New Zealand for simply having on your computer his manifesto. Well, that's ridiculous. I've read Mein Kampf, okay? Does that turn me into a Nazi? I'm capable of reading something that I disagree with and not being corrupted by it. But that's not what the New Zealand government thinks. This was announced by the official government censor of New Zealand. And I was like, wow. The government of New Zealand has a censor whose job it is deciding what people in New Zealand ought to be allowed to read. This is another British, you know, country of British origin. And if you think that this is not coming to the United States, I guarantee it is. The left is desperate to end free speech in the United States. They are desperate to. And I want to give you a couple examples of that. There was a constitutional amendment that was proposed in the United States Senate in 2014 to change the First Amendment and allow Congress to make laws about regulating political speech. So Congress would be able to make laws regulating what you would be allowed to say about Congress. What could go wrong with that? You know, that's how could that be a problem? And every single Democrat in the United States Congress, in the United States Senate, voted for it. All of them. Okay, now you need 65%. Okay, they didn't have 66 senators. Okay, they don't have the 2/3, so it didn't go anywhere. But I want you to understand, if they had 2/3, that's what they'd be doing. Okay, removing the First Amendment so that Congress could regulate free speech. Now there were hearings in the democratically controlled House just a couple weeks ago, just in April, I think, where they were discussing what they consider to be the greatest threat to the United States, which is white supremacy. They had a whole hearing about white supremacy. And Candace Owens, I don't know if you guys know who Candace Owens is? She's one of my favorites. She was there and she did a great job of throwing it back in their face. But very few people other than me listened to the entire 4-hour hearing. And I want you to understand what the hearing was about. The hearing was about that the greatest threat to our republic is white supremacy. It's just everywhere. Mobs of white supremacists are roaming the streets all the time. And what causes white supremacy? According to witness after witness after witness, white supremacy is caused by free speech. The witnesses and the congressmen were saying, you know, we got to get laws. People can just say whatever they want on the internet. We can't have that. People say whatever they want. Before long, they turn to white supremacists. We need to give the police powers to arrest people for expressing the wrong opinion on Facebook or on YouTube or on Twitter. Okay? This is what's happening in this country right now. You probably have heard that the social media has been kicking people off by the hundreds, by the thousands, for expressing, not for doing anything that's criminal, not for proposing crimes or threatening people, but for simply expressing opinions that the people who own, Facebook and Twitter and Google don't like. And I understand there's an issue there in terms of, private companies versus public laws, but I'm just talking about the trend. The trend is to shut up whoever it is that you don't want to hear their opinion, that they need to be shut up by force. And it's one of the greatest issues that's going to be facing our country in your generation. Another issue, another principle that I wanted to call your attention to is the principles enshrined in our Constitution in terms of our judicial process. That you're entitled, if you're accused of a crime, to due process, which includes a whole bunch of things, starting from how the police treat you, to how the court treats you, to even how the prison treats you, if you're convicted. And these are principles. Our Constitution is an incredibly principled document because our founding fathers wanted these same rules to apply to everybody. And they are also greatly endangered. We don't tend to think of the President of the United States, as being a victim of anything because, he's the president. But if you look at this whole, Mueller hearing and its aftermath, it's a classic example of what our founding fathers did not want the country to be about. Okay, when Mueller turned in his report and there was nothing there, they were talking to what's his name, Jerry Nadler, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and and he said, "Well, we're just going to keep investigating." And a reporter said, "Well, what are you investigating?" And he said, "I don't know, but we'll find something." Okay? This is exactly what our founding fathers did not want. They did not want a society where the police show up at your door and say, "We don't know what you did, but we'll find something. We're going to toss through your life until we find something we can nail you with." It's the exact opposite of due process. You're supposed to start with a crime. Like a crime happens, and you investigate the crime, and you find suspects. And then if you've got enough evidence, you can try to convict your suspects. You are not supposed to start with the suspects and try to find a crime you can pin on them. And yet, that is exactly the direction we're moving in. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Hope.
There's actually a name for states like that. We call those police states, searching people for crimes and not crimes for people. And it is very unconstitutional. And every police officer who believes in that should be prisoned themselves.
Yeah, it's coming, and it's coming here.
But it's
Okay. All right, it's already here. But that's what I'm talking about. My daughter is in law school, and I did not go to law school myself, but she's in law school. I'm always very interested in the law. We send things back and forth all the time. She sent me an interview a while back, a lengthy interview that was done a number of years ago with Justice Scalia, who was always one of my heroes, okay? I think he was one of the great minds of all time on the U.S. Supreme Court. And I listened to the whole interview, and it was fascinating. And then, it's YouTube, so they have a bunch of suggestions. And one of their suggestions they had was there was an interview with Justice Ginsburg. And Justice Ginsburg is like the brains of the left on the Supreme Court. Okay, Scalia was like the brains of the right. She's the brains of the left. And I decided I like to listen to everybody, because I believe in free speech. And so I wanted to listen to her too. So I listened to the whole interview. And this is interesting, I think. I got to hear each of them asked a question that you would never ask the other one. Does that make sense? Okay, you know what the question they asked Scalia? They asked Scalia, "Do you ever not like your own decisions?" Isn't that a fascinating question? Do you ever not like your own decisions? And you know what Scalia said? He said, "It happens all the time." He said, because, I'm a judge, I'm a human being. And what happens when you're a judge is that you've got two people or two groups of people who come before you. You've got these guys on sitting behind one desk, and these guys come on the other side, and they present their case, and you're ruling on who's right and who's wrong. And he said, I'm a human. I kind of like these guys. These guys over here seem like nice, cool people. I'd like to be friends with them. I'd like to hang out with them. They're my kind of people. These guys over here, I don't like them so much. But you know what? The Constitution's on their side. And my job as a judge is not to tell you who I like and who I don't like. My job as a judge is to apply the Constitution fairly to everybody who comes before me, and it happens all the time that the people who benefit from my decision are people that I didn't particularly like. And that's just the way it is if you're going to be a judge. You would never ask that question of Ginsburg. Because I can tell you right now, Ginsburg is not a bad person. She's a very nice person, and she's a very smart person. I would never doubt her intellect. But Ginsburg, I know right now, never doesn't like her own decisions, because the minute you walk into the court, she's already decided which way she's going to rule, and she sees her job as figuring out a way to explain how the Constitution happened to be on the side, once again, of the people that she wanted to win all along. Okay? And don't get me, that can be challenging. It's not always easy to come up with a new explanation as to why the Constitution keeps landing on the side of whoever it is you like and against whoever it is you don't like. But it is the opposite of principled. Okay, this is the judicial issue of our time. When there's a Supreme Court nominee, if you listen to the questions that the Democrats ask of the nominee, there are always questions like, well, 59% of the time, you supported the corporation against the individual, or the man against the woman, or the white against the black, or whatever it might be. How can we put you on the Supreme Court, if you're unbalanced like that? And you just think about how crazy a question like that is. Judges are not supposed to have a quota of which way they're ruling. I mean, is that the kind of judge you want? That you go into court and the judge says, well, you're a white Protestant woman, and the last time I had a white Protestant woman, I voted for her. So now I got to vote against you. We got to send you to jail because I got to keep this balanced and make sure that I'm even-handed on this. That's not even-handed. Okay, that's making your judgment based on what categories you put the person in. You're supposed to look at the law, the Constitution, and the facts, and base the judgment on that. And yet, more and more, this is what's being called for. Oh, by the way, in case you were wondering, the question that they asked Ginsburg that you would never ask Scalia was this. They said to Ginsburg, in the time you have left on the Supreme Court, what goals do you have? What would you like to achieve in your remaining time on the Supreme Court? If you asked Scalia that question, he'd throw you out of the room. He'd say, I'm a judge. Okay? Judges don't have goals. We don't have agendas. You bring me the case, and I'm supposed to apply the Constitution to this case and tell you what the Constitution says about the situation. I'm not supposed to have a goal of, I want to make this happen. Ginsburg was, of course, happy to say a whole bunch of things. She wanted to, end the death penalty again. She had a whole bunch of things that she wanted to accomplish because that's what she sees her job as. This is the choice that we're facing on a judicial level in this country, whether we have judges who want a particular outcome or judges who are principled and want to apply the law and the Constitution fairly to everybody who comes before them. It's a completely different philosophy. And I've got one more category, and that is I want to talk about capitalism itself. Because one of the things that bothers me often with younger people, but even older people, when I talk about economics, is that we seem to have convinced ourselves as a country that there are 67 different economic systems from which we can choose. And you look at the menu and say, let's try economic system number 49. Let's give that one a shot. That sounds like a good system. Well, it's not true. There are two economic systems you can choose from. You have got two choices. The first one is called capitalism. And capitalism is the only principled economic system that there is. Why is it principled? Because the same rules apply to everybody. Okay? What's fascinating is it's actually the egalitarian option. You don't get the same results, of course, because people are different. But fairness does not mean the same results, does it? If you have a baseball game and it's fair, does that mean that both teams end up with the exact same number of runs at the end? No, that's not what fair means. Fair doesn't mean it's a tie. Fair means that everyone had the same rules applying to them. That 3 strikes and you're out applied to everybody. That's a principle. The outcome has nothing to do with your principles. And the only option for this is called capitalism. If you leave people alone, what you've got is capitalism. Now, capitalism has rules, but they are principled rules. They are a very short, simple list of rules that apply to the richest people in the world and the poorest people in the world and everybody in between. Would you like to know what they are? I can tell you the entire rule book of capitalism right now. You ready? You can't steal stuff. You can't hurt people. You can't threaten to hurt people. You can't lie about what you're selling people, okay? You can't say, oh, this is 100% pure beef and it's actually made of ground up alley cats or something, okay? You can't do that. That's it. That's the complete rule book for capitalism. It's the whole thing. Okay, you do those, the rules apply to everybody, and then the outcome is whatever the outcome is. We all have different things to bring to the table. We all figure out different ways of utilizing what we bring to the table, and we get different results. So what is socialism? Is it a principle? It's absolutely not, because socialism wants a particular outcome. And you can't have the same rules for everybody and get the outcome that you want. You have to constantly be changing it. What socialism actually is like this. Because socialism doesn't believe in anything, just like left doesn't believe in anything. Socialism is an individual, a person, who has a vision. A vision about your life. They've got a vision about what your life ought to be like. And they believe, because this is the second half of socialism, they believe that their vision gives them the moral authority to use the force of government to impose their vision on you, to make you live your life the way they think you should live your life. Okay? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wants to ban airplanes and have a genocide against cows and build a train to Hawaii and do a bunch of other things like that because she has a vision on your life, okay? Bernie Sanders is a socialist. Why? Because he has a vision about your life and totally believes that it's that he has the moral authority in his vision to force it on you who do not share the vision. Do you know who else was a socialist? Hitler was a socialist. He was the head of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, okay? He was completely a socialist. Mussolini was a socialist, okay? Literally, he called himself a socialist. What does that mean? Well, Hitler had a vision. He had a vision about what everyone else's life should be like. Do you doubt that? Do you doubt his sincerity? He genuinely believed that he knew what was right for everybody else. And everybody knows that Hitler did not like the Jews, but it's more complicated than that. Hitler didn't like a lot of people. Okay? He didn't like the Poles, for instance. In Nazi-occupied Poland, it was the law, this was written law in Nazi-occupied Poland, that the richest Pole had to be poorer than the poorest German. It was the law. The Germans had to be up here, and the Poles all had to be down here. Why? Because in Hitler's vision, Germans are good and Poles are bad. So he's going to use force to make it come out that way. He liked the Russians even less than the Poles. There was also, the great thing about the Nazis, they wrote everything down. We've got all these detailed plans. The Nazis had a whole concept of what to do with the Russians. They were basically going to be turned into a race of slaves to serve the Germans, and they were going to give very limited education, just enough reading and math skills just so they could follow orders and be good slaves, okay? It's a whole written out plan. So the Germans were going to be here, and the Poles were going to be here, and the Russians were going to be here, and the Jews he liked least of all. He was going to kill them. They're going to be like under the ground because we're going to kill them all. What term could we describe this system as? Social justice. This is what social justice is. This is Hitler's vision of what's right for everybody, okay? He had it all figured out, just like Bernie Sanders. And I want to be clear here, I'm not suggesting that Bernie Sanders and Hitler have the same vision. They clearly had a different vision. And I'm well aware that Bernie Sanders is Jewish. I'm sure he doesn't share Hitler's racial vision. That's not my point. What they have in common is not that they have the same vision. What they have in common is that they both believe that they are entitled to use the force of government to impose their vision on people who do not share it. That is what all socialists have in common. They have different visions, but they believe that they're entitled to impose it on you, which is where the capitalists break off. Capitalists don't want to impose anything. They want to leave you alone as long as you follow those 4 rules that I gave you, and you can live your life and pursue your goals free from outside interference. And if Hitler, let's do it the other way, if Bernie Sanders were here today, what do you think he would say about what I just said? I'll tell you what he'd say. He'd say, okay, but Hitler was bad, and my vision is good. That's the difference. And fair enough. What if Hitler were here today? He'd say, well, my vision is good, and Bernie Sanders' vision is bad. You know, there you go. Okay? The question is whether you and your children and your children's children want to be free, or whether you want to live at the whim of somebody else's vision for the rest of eternity. What you got for me?
So why are Democrats saying that white supremacy is so present in modern day things if there's movements like the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's literally a month dedicated to Black lives, and they've got all these things that's suggesting, honestly, there are people saying that blacks are better than white people these days. So why are they still trying to pretend that black people are being judged really harshly and there's all of this segregation when really it's starting to flip and turn the opposite way?
Because the left does not believe in anything except power. It is a cult of power. They want power over you. And they tear down institutions that they believe the removal of which will help them get to power. And that's what it's all about. I'm giving this to you straight. There is no interest in anything but power. They support, you know, LGBT rights, and they support radical Muslims. Radical Muslims hate gays. They kill them. They throw them off of buildings. Okay? It's the most bizarre thing in the world. But so what do all these people have in common? Is that they're against the West. They're against the Constitution. They're against free speech because they want control. It is a cult of power. And this is I think one of the most important things to understand about the left in the Western world today. They don't particularly care what they do to you once they're in power. What matters is that they get to power and that you don't have any power. Okay? Once they're in power, they will change their mind 100 times about what they want to do with you. If you look at like Stalin or Mao Zedong, they did this all the time. They wake up one morning and said, you know, yesterday we were having everybody do this, but you know what? I changed my mind. Tell them to stop doing this, move them all over here, and have them do that instead. Okay? What matters is that they're the boss and you're not. Yes, ma'am.
So would we be correct in assuming that you believe that the right thing to do would not be to go to one balance, like the solution is balance?
I don't know what that means.
Sorry. We shouldn't be, you know, the problem was that everyone was saying, oh, you know, they were being prejudiced against black people.
Okay.
And now they're starting to be prejudiced against white people. So you think that just
I think the solution is principles. Okay? The principles that we find in the Bible, the principles that we find in the Constitution, and they're principles because they apply to everybody all the time. Okay, and black people and white people and every other kind of people should have the exact same rights and the exact same freedoms, okay? And so it was absolutely wrong for America at one point to put a thumb on the scale and say, you know, we're going to make sure that, you know, black people get less because, you know, or whoever gets less. Frankly, the Chinese arguably were even more discriminated against in the 19th century than black people were. Anti-Chinese discrimination was absolutely horrendous in this country at one point. But that's all wrong. And it's wrong to put it on the scale the other way. And this is the difference between being principled and being not principled, okay? If you're simply doing this as power politics, you say, well, we're going to flip the scales and we're going to make you the oppressed now. Principled is to say we're not going to oppress anybody. We're going to have the same rights and the same freedoms for everybody, and the left will never go for that because what they want is power. And a point I should make: I don't want to imply that people who are conservative or traditional or Christians or whatever that we always live up to our principles. We're flawed people. Everybody's a flawed person, and that's just the way we are. But that doesn't take away from the principles. The principles are good whether you live up to them or not. If you fail to live up to your principles, you failed. The principles were as good as they always were. The principles are fine, okay? So the difference is we at least ought to be striving to maintain those principles for everybody and for all time. And the other side in this doesn't believe in it at all. They want to live in a society that does not have principles. That's simply a matter of power. You know who may have said this best is Lenin, of all people, who said like this. He said, once we have socialism, there's only two questions left: who and whom. Those are the two questions when you have socialism. Who's doing it and who's getting it done to them? Who's giving the orders and who's taking the orders? Once you cross that line into socialism, that's all that's left. And it's fascinating because socialism, with all this talk about how egalitarian it is, actually perceives two different groups of people. It perceives the people who give the orders and the people who take the orders. You notice that capitalism doesn't have any divisions like that at all. The rules for capitalism apply to absolutely everybody. Okay? Only socialism has special socialist people who get to give the orders, and everybody else is following the orders. Okay? It's fascinating because they're egalitarian, but they're actually not. The difference couldn't be more great. In socialism, they promise everything. Free health care, free education, free housing, free everything, free money. And they deliver nothing. They deliver Venezuela. Okay? Capitalism promises nothing. Okay, does capitalism promise you anything? It doesn't promise you anything at all, except you're free. Okay? And capitalism, without any promises at all, has delivered the greatest standard of living that's ever existed on the face of the earth. The average American today is approximately 5,000 times wealthier than the average American in the time of George Washington. Did you know that? We're about 5,000 times wealthier, as much as you can calculate this in terms of, obviously, we have, smartphones today and things that couldn't have even been dreamt of in George Washington's times. But it's just unbelievable. And this was all accomplished by just letting people alone. Now, capitalism will let you starve. If you sit around and you're not going to do anything about it, you can starve. If you don't work, you don't eat, and that's a law of nature. Okay, that's not something capitalists made up. That's nature. Okay, if you were stranded on a desert island like Robinson Crusoe, all by yourself, if you don't work, you don't eat. Okay, what do you think? Someone's going to deliver you dinner? Okay, you have to do that yourself. Do you know what the rule is in socialism? Yeah, okay, but which is true, but I was going to suggest another one. The equivalent rule in socialism is if you don't obey, you don't eat. Okay? If you don't work, you don't eat is natural. Socialism says if you don't obey, you don't eat. And the question, as I said, is whether we're going to live under that or we're going to have freedom going on into the future. Anyhow, I wanted to share those thoughts. I hope you're finding something in them. I'm happy to take some more questions. Most of you are around for lunch. I will very quickly, just for people who may have missed it, mention my books if you're still interested. I know a bunch of people got them over lunch. I write kind of cute, humorous books that teach political and economic lessons in a humorous sort of way. My first book, The New Democrat, is a parody history of the Obama years done as the Cat in the Hat, with Reid and Pelosi as thing one and thing two. It humorously tells the whole story of Obama, done as the Cat in the Hat. Salon.com called it the most twisted piece of conservative propaganda print matter out there. So you know I get good reviews. My second book is a parody of the Lorax. It's about how environmentalists are destroying our country for profit. It's called The Gorax because it stars Al Gore as the Lorax character. And it's about how America used to be free and prosperous, and then the environmentalist wackos showed up, and step by step, regulation by regulation, are driving everybody out of business. And then my latest book is about the last election. It's called The Wizard of Iz, a parody of The Wizard of Oz with Bill Clinton as the wizard, Hillary as the Wicked Witch. There's even a cowardly rhino who suspects the Democrats are wrong, but he's too scared to do anything about it. Anyhow, if you're interested, I've still got some copies of this, and I would be happy to supply them to you if you like. You want me to take questions? Were there questions on principles or everything else? Yes, sir.
The books.
The books.
Were people paying for them, or are you just giving them away? Or
Yeah, you got to pay for them. It's hard to understand this, but amazingly, I was not able to get any government subsidies at all for them. Okay, so I have been reduced to capitalism, so I do have to charge. Sorry about that. Were there any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So you say that the left has no principles, and that
Correct.
they're mainly
Except power.
Yes.
They want themselves to be in power, and nothing else.
So would it be correct to say that what you're saying is that the left governs, whereas you're saying the right governs by principle, the left governs by their vision? Right?
The right at least strives to govern by principle. I don't want to leave you with the impression that because somebody is on the right, they're therefore inherently principled and everything they do must be good. People can always be flawed, and people can always do bad things, even when they set out to be good things. You know, I think you know, you guys understand enough about the world to understand that. What I'm saying is that the right, to the extent that we, you know, are on the right, you and me in this program, we are basing this on principles. And if we stick to our principles, we will be right. So yes.
All right, sorry, that was like lead up.
Okay, I got it. I'm just being careful.
Would you then say that the left also governs by principle because their visions are built on principles, different principles? Principles of they believe that everyone should be cared for, everyone should be taken care of, which is definitely a socialist point of view. But the main difference between like the right and the left is their means to get to the end. And whereas the right seeks to still be principled, you're saying that the left doesn't seek to be principled.
They don't, and they don't believe that. They say whatever they need to say to get into power. They do not believe in anything that applies equally to everybody at all times, because that would be where I started with. A principle is something that applies all the time to everybody.
But
Okay,
if what they want to accomplish, they want equal things. They want things that apply to everyone. They want
okay,
healthcare that applies to everyone.
it's inherently contradictory, because the only way to achieve equality with human beings is to treat people unequally. Do you know anyone who believes that if everybody has the exact same rules, okay? If everyone's playing by the same set of rules, do you believe that everyone will end up with the exact same amount of money? Of course not. It's absurd. Human beings are incredibly different from each other. If we're all playing by the same set of rules, people are going to end up with different amounts of money. The only way to make the outcome equal is to treat people unequally. Does that make sense? I gotta say, you got too much, okay? I'm taking it away from you, and I'm giving it to him because he's got too. Oh, now you got too much. You've been doing. I'm gonna take it away from you, and I'm gonna give it to him. Okay? Once you have socialism, you are forever doing that. You're exercising arbitrary power. Next point is that the people who get to do that, the people who get to look around and say you have too much, you have too little, you've got the right amount, are those people equal to everybody else? Obviously they're not. They get to go around rearranging everybody's money. Okay? So they're obviously not equal. The equality is a lie. Inequality is inherently built into the socialist model. The only system that treats people equally with no pretense of equal outcomes, just equal treatment, is capitalism. And that's what I'm saying. Now, what the left believes is that you should not be allowed to disagree with them. They don't think you should be allowed to disagree with them. And that's an incredibly important, sobering thought. Whenever they get to power, they see their job as preventing people from disagreeing with them because they don't believe that they should be disagreed with. Yes, ma'am?
So that's why they want to shut down freedom of speech.
Yes, that's why they're absolutely fanatically opposed to freedom of speech and an independent judiciary and pretty much and the right to keep and bear arms. Okay, if you want to control everybody, taking away their arms is a pretty good way to start also, okay? If you look at the entire agenda, it's all about getting rid of all of these principles that our society is based on and replacing them with the power of these guys. And as I said, they don't particularly care what they do to you. It has been a pleasure. I hope this has been interesting for you. If you want to check out my books, I'll be in the back. And hope to see you guys all again soon.